In Hollywood, some stars don't fade, they burn. Their final moments were marked not by applause, but by flames that swallowed entire lives in seconds. This is the untold truth behind the actors whose stories ended in fire, leaving only smoke, ashes, and a legacy that refuses to die. Number 1. Paul Walker. It was a clear Saturday afternoon on November 30th, 2013, when Paul Walker unknowingly stepped into the final chapter of his life. He had just left a charity event for victims of Typhoon Haiyan, riding in the passenger seat of a red Porsche Carrera GT driven by his friend and business partner, Roger Rodas. The car sped through the quiet streets of Santa Clarita, sunlight reflecting off its polished frame, a moment that should have been ordinary for a man who had spent years racing across movie screens. But in reality, destiny had already shifted. Within minutes, the Porsche lost control, spinning violently before striking a concrete light pole and a tree. The impact was devastating, but what came after was even more horrifying. Flames erupted instantly, engulfing the wreckage so intensely that smoke could be seen from blocks away. Witnesses rushed toward the scene, shouting Paul's name, but the heat pushed everyone back, the fire feeding on the twisted metal until the car became an inferno. When firefighters arrived, the vehicle was fully consumed, its frame collapsing under the extreme temperatures. The coroner later confirmed what fans feared most. Paul had suffered catastrophic injuries from the crash, but thermal injuries from the fire also played a critical role in his death. The grief that followed spread through Los Angeles like a shockwave. Fans gathered at the crash site, placing candles, notes, and photographs along the sidewalk as news spread worldwide. His Fast and Furious co-stars were shattered, struggling to comprehend how a man known for humility, kindness, and calm energy had been taken in such a violent way. The irony was cruel. After years of performing high-speed chases on screen, Paul Walker lost his life in a split second on an ordinary suburban road. But behind the fame stood a man remembered not for speed or spectacle, but for compassion. His organization, Reach Out Worldwide, existed because he believed that celebrity meant responsibility, a belief he lived out until the very end. Even now, the exact tree from the crash site is gone, but fans still visit the place where fire claimed him, whispering his name as if he were still there. Number 2. Carole Lombard. On the night of January 16, 1942, the sky above Nevada lit up with a blaze so violent that it could be seen from miles away. Carole Lombard, Hollywood's queen of screwball comedy and one of the most magnetic actresses of her era, was on her way home after a successful war bond tour. She had been in high spirits, eager to return to Los Angeles and reunite with her husband, Clark Gable, the man she adored. She boarded Transcontinental and Western Air Flight 3, a routine trip that should have taken only a few hours. But hidden within the darkness was a fate no one could escape. At around 7:20 p.m., the aircraft veered off course and struck Potosi Mountain with unimaginable force. The explosion echoed across the desert, igniting a massive fire that tore through the wreckage. Flames consumed the mountainside, turning the cold night into a furnace. Rescue teams stood helpless at the base, unable to climb the steep, burning terrain until morning. When daylight broke, the scene was heartbreaking. Twisted metal, charred earth, and fragments of the aircraft were scattered across the rocky slope. The coroner confirmed that all 22 passengers, including soldiers, crew members, and Carole herself, had died on impact. The blaze had erased nearly everything recognizable. Lombard was just 33, at the peak of her brilliance, starring in classics like My Man Godfrey and To Be or Not to Be. Her wit was sharp, her presence electric, and she was known not just as a screen legend, but as one of Hollywood's most compassionate souls. News of the crash reached Clark Gable while he was home in California. Friends recalled that he collapsed upon hearing it. He immediately flew to Nevada, climbing the still smoldering mountain alongside rescue workers, refusing to leave until he saw the sight himself. The government would later erect a memorial on that lonely mountainside, a place that still carries an eerie silence, a silence that feels as if it's holding her memory in its palms. Carole Lombard's life ended in fire, but her legacy became immortal. Her courage, humor, and radiant spirit continued to echo through Hollywood history, long after the flames vanished into the desert wind. Number 3. Anne Heche. On the morning of August 5, 2022, a quiet Los Angeles neighborhood was shattered by the roar of an engine and the violent crash that followed. Anne Heche, the Emmy-winning actress known for her intensity, unpredictability, and fearless screen presence, had been driving her blue Mini Cooper through the Mar Vista area. Security cameras captured her car racing down narrow streets at nearly 90 miles per hour, far faster than anyone could comprehend for a residential block. Within seconds, her vehicle veered off the road and slammed into a small home with such force that it penetrated deep into the living room. The impact triggered an instant fireball. Flames erupted from the engine, spreading through the structure as smoke curled upward into the hot summer sky. Neighbors sprinted toward the wreckage, shouting for help, but the fire grew too fast, too violent. The entire house was engulfed within moments. When firefighters arrived, the blaze was raging out of control, flames leaping through windows and swallowing the roof. It took more than 60 firefighters and nearly an hour to bring the inferno under control. Only then were they able to reach Anne. They pulled her out from the blackened remains of the car, unconscious, severely burned, and clinging to life. She was rushed to the Grossman Burn Center with catastrophic injuries, her lungs damaged by smoke and heat. For days, she remained in a coma while doctors fought to stabilize her. The official report that followed confirmed what many feared. She died from inhalation and thermal injuries caused by the fire. The tragedy was amplified by the strange, troubling events leading up to the crash. Witnesses reported seeing her drive erratically, nearly colliding with other vehicles. Some believed she was fleeing something or someone. Others thought she was disoriented. No one truly knew what turmoil she carried in those final hours. Anne Heche had been a familiar force in Hollywood since the 1990s, starring in Donnie Brasco, 6 Days, 7 Nights, and the Psycho remake. Her career was marked by bold choices and emotional risk, making her one of the most compelling actresses of her generation. The house she crashed into was destroyed, reduced to charred beams and ashes, but the woman who lived there survived thanks to neighbors who pulled her to safety. The street where the tragedy unfolded still bears the memory of that day, the scorched pavement, the rebuilt home, the stories whispered by those who saw the fire. Anne Heche's final moments were chaotic, fiery, and heartbreaking. Yet the impact she made on Hollywood remains intact, alive in the fierce performances she left behind. Number 4. Ricky Nelson. On December 31, 1985, while the world prepared to welcome a new year, tragedy was already unfolding in the sky above DeKalb, Texas. Ricky Nelson, once one of America's most adored teen idols, boarded a private plane with his fiancée Helen Blair and members of his band. They were traveling to Dallas for a New Year's Eve performance, a comeback concert meant to close the year with music and hope. But somewhere over the Texas countryside, witnesses on the ground noticed something alarming: smoke trailing behind the aircraft as it flew low across the winter sky. Moments later, the plane descended into a cow pasture and exploded on impact, erupting into a violent fireball that sent a column of black smoke towering into the air. Local farmers ran toward the blaze, desperate to help, but the flames were too intense to approach. When firefighters arrived, the fuselage was engulfed, the heat so extreme it warped metal, and sent debris scattering across the field. Inside, 7 passengers, including Ricky, had already perished. Only the 2 pilots managed to crawl out alive, badly burned but conscious enough to describe the horror. The National Transportation Safety Board's investigation later revealed that the fire originated inside the cabin, likely caused by a faulty heater that malfunctioned mid-flight. The passengers had died from smoke inhalation and burns, even before the plane struck the ground. Ricky Nelson was just 45 years old. For millions, he had been the face of innocence, America's golden boy, growing up on the beloved television series The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. His smooth voice and clean-cut charm made hits like Travelin' Man and Hello Mary Lou timeless. But fame had not protected him from the shifting tides of the music world. As rock evolved, Ricky faced career struggles, personal heartbreaks, and the weight of expectations that chased him long after the spotlight dimmed. In the aftermath of his death, rumors circulated wildly, falsely suggesting drug use had caused the fire. Investigators quickly shut those claims down, confirming mechanical failure as the true cause. Across the country, fans held candlelight vigils, playing his records late into the night in tribute. His twin sons, Matthew and Gunnar, later formed the band Nelson, carrying forward the musical torch lit by their father decades earlier. The plane that burned in that Texas field ended his journey far too soon, but the music he left behind continues to echo, a reminder of a boy who became a star who became a legend, and a legend whose final moments were swallowed by fire. Number 5. Audie Murphy. On the morning of May 28, 1971, thick fog settled across the Appalachian Mountains, wrapping the rugged landscape in a silent, pale haze. Somewhere above that mist, a small twin-engine plane carrying Audie Murphy, America's most decorated World War II soldier turned Hollywood star, vanished from radar. The aircraft had departed Atlanta en route to Martinsville, Virginia, but as visibility worsened, something went catastrophically wrong. Hours later, search teams located the wreckage, scattered along the steep slopes of Brush Mountain. The plane had slammed into the hillside with tremendous force, bursting into flames that burned for hours before rescuers could even approach. When they finally reached the crash site, they found twisted metal, scorched earth, and fragments of the aircraft still smoldering in the cold mountain air. The fire had been so intense that the remains of the 6 passengers, including Murphy, were unrecognizable, identified only through dental records. He was 45 years old. For many Americans, the news felt impossible. How could a man who had survived the brutal chaos of war, charging through enemy fire, rescuing wounded soldiers, and holding the line against overwhelming odds, lose his life quietly, anonymously, on a foggy mountainside? Audie Murphy's rise to fame had been nothing short of extraordinary. After earning every major U.S. combat award, including the Medal of Honor, he transitioned into acting, bringing his quiet strength and haunted eyes to westerns and war dramas. His most iconic role came in To Hell and Back, where he portrayed himself, reliving the very battles that had defined his youth. Behind the camera, however, Murphy carried scars that no medal could heal. He battled insomnia, trauma, and the weight of memories that followed him long after the war ended. Friends often said he lived with a heaviness that only veterans understood. That made his death in peaceful American countryside feel even more tragic, an ending far removed from the heroism he embodied. Thousands attended his funeral at Arlington National Cemetery, where he was laid to rest with full military honors. Even today, visitors leave flowers, flags, and handwritten notes at his grave, thanking him for courage that shaped a generation. A memorial now stands on Brush Mountain, overlooking the quiet valley where the crash occurred. The wind that passes through the trees carries no trace of fire, no echo of the moment that ended his life. But for those who remember him, Audie Murphy's legacy remains untouchable, a hero in war, a star in Hollywood, and a man whose final moments were consumed by flames hidden in the fog. Number 6. Linda Darnell. In the early hours of April 10, 1965, a quiet suburban neighborhood in Glenview, Illinois, was jolted awake by the sound of breaking glass, rising smoke, and terrified screams. Inside a modest two-story home, flames were spreading with terrifying speed. Actress Linda Darnell, once one of 20th Century Fox's most luminous stars, was staying the night with a close friend, sharing drinks, laughter, and old memories as they watched one of her films on television. But sometime after midnight, a forgotten cigarette smoldered on the living room couch. Within minutes, the fabric ignited, feeding a fire that crawled up the walls and filled the house with thick, suffocating smoke. Linda had been asleep upstairs when the heat reached her room. Disoriented, she tried to escape, moving toward the kitchen door, but the flames overtook the narrow hallways before she could make it out. Neighbors who saw the blaze rushed to help. They pulled Linda's friend and the friend's young daughter to safety through a window, but the fire was too strong to reach Linda. Firefighters entered the burning house and found her unconscious near the kitchen area, severely burned but still alive. She was rushed to the hospital, fighting for her life, but the burns covered most of her body. By the next day, she was gone. She was only 41. For Hollywood, the news felt like a wound reopening. Linda Darnell had risen to fame in the 1940s with films like Forever Amber, A Letter to Three Wives, and Unfaithfully Yours, earning praise for her striking beauty and emotional depth. Critics called her the girl with the perfect face, but behind the elegance was a woman marked by heartbreak, failed marriages, studio pressures, and years spent trying to reclaim the spotlight. That night in Illinois, she had seemed hopeful again, talking about new roles and fresh beginnings. Hours later, the same fire that once lit her name on studio marquees consumed her final moments. After the investigation ended, the cause was ruled accidental, a tragedy born from a single spark. Fans gathered at studio gates, leaving flowers beneath her photograph. Many spoke of the symbolism, an actress whose life had been framed by light, lost to flames she could not outrun. Today, Linda Darnell rests in her hometown of Dallas, far from Hollywood's bright lights, but her legacy endures in every frame she ever appeared in, a reminder of a star whose brilliance never faded, even as fire claimed her too soon. Number 7. Martha Mansfield. On November 30th, 1923, what should have been an ordinary break during filming turned into one of the earliest and most horrifying tragedies in Hollywood history. Actress Martha Mansfield, a rising star of the silent film era, was on location in San Antonio, Texas, shooting The Warrens of Virginia. The production had been working outdoors all afternoon, the cast dressed in heavy Civil War-era costumes layered with lace, muslin, and highly flammable fabric. During a short pause between scenes, Martha stepped into a parked car to rest in the shade, her long period dress spread around her, a costume beautiful on camera but unbelievably dangerous in real life. A bystander, believed to be holding a lit match or cigarette, walked too close. In a single instant, the hem of her dress ignited. Flames shot upward with terrifying speed, feeding on the delicate materials. Within seconds, Martha was engulfed. Panic erupted across the set. Crew members raced toward her, desperate to smother the fire consuming her body. Her co-star Wilfred Lytell tore off his heavy military overcoat and wrapped it around her, burning his own hands in the process. Others beat at the flames with their jackets, but the fire had already done its worst. When the blaze was finally extinguished, Martha was still conscious, but barely. She was rushed to a nearby hospital, suffering catastrophic burns from her neck to her knees. Doctors fought through the night to save her, but the injuries were too severe. Less than 24 hours later, Martha Mansfield died from shock and complications caused by the burns. She was just 24 years old. Hollywood was devastated. Martha had been on the brink of major stardom, admired for her grace, intelligence, and striking screen presence. She had already worked with legends like John Barrymore, and producers believed she was destined to become one of the defining actresses of her generation. Newspapers across America printed the tragic details, and audiences mourned a talent extinguished before it could fully shine. Her death sent shockwaves through the industry, prompting urgent conversations about safety on sets. In the years that followed, new rules and fire prevention standards were enacted, policies inspired in part by the young actress who paid the ultimate price for Hollywood's early lack of caution. The site of the accident, once just a dusty road near the film location, became a quiet landmark for those who knew her story. Nearly a century later, Martha Mansfield's final moments still stand as a haunting reminder of how fragile early filmmaking truly was. Fire took her in seconds, but her legacy, tragically brief, remains unforgettable. Number 8. Jack Cassidy. Just before dawn on December 12, 1976, firefighters were dispatched to an apartment building on North Kings Road in West Hollywood after neighbors reported smoke pouring from one of the units. Inside that burning apartment lived Jack Cassidy, award-winning Broadway star, television actor, and one of entertainment's most magnetic personalities. He was known for his charm, his booming voice, and the effortless charisma that made audiences lean in whenever he stepped on stage. But behind the elegance and talent, Jack often wrestled with inner storms, long nights, and private battles that fame could never quiet. That morning, those storms collided with tragedy. Neighbors later told investigators they had heard nothing unusual, just a quiet night followed by the faint scent of smoke. Some believed Jack had fallen asleep with a lit cigarette, something he was known to do after evenings of drinking. By the time anyone realized what was happening, flames were already spreading inside his apartment, feeding on furniture and curtains, and building into a deadly inferno. When firefighters arrived, the fire had overtaken the entire unit. Heat tore through the walls, collapsing parts of the ceiling and sending waves of smoke into the hallways. Crews fought aggressively to break through the flames, but it took time before they could safely enter. When they finally did, they found a single body lying near the front door, Jack Cassidy, overcome by smoke before he ever had a chance to escape. He was identified through dental records. He was 49. For audiences of the 1960s and 70s, Jack Cassidy was unforgettable. He won a Tony Award, dazzled television viewers with appearances on shows like Columbo, and built a reputation as an actor who could shift from comedy to villainy with astonishing ease. Off-screen, though, he struggled with bipolar disorder and alcoholism, weights he carried quietly, even as the world admired his brilliance. The fire that took his life left the building in ruins. Charred walls, melted fixtures, and the lingering scent of smoke stretched for blocks, a stark contrast to the bright energy Jack had brought to every stage. His son, David Cassidy, one of the era's biggest teen idols, arrived quickly after hearing the news. Years later, he would describe the moment as surreal, the painful shock of losing a father whose life burned brightly but ended in darkness. Investigators concluded the fire was accidental, almost certainly started by a cigarette left smoldering as Jack slept. Hollywood mourned not just the loss of an actor, but the loss of a spirit too intense, too alive to fade quietly. His final moments were consumed by fire, but his legacy continues to blaze through the roles he left behind, roles that remind us how charisma and chaos can exist in the same unforgettable soul. Number 9. Butterfly McQueen. On the evening of December 22, 1995, a faint glow appeared inside a small home in Augusta, Georgia, a glow that, within minutes, erupted into a deadly fire. Inside lived Butterfly McQueen, the unforgettable actress whose high-pitched voice and expressive humor made her role as Prissy in Gone with the Wind a permanent piece of film history. She was 84 years old, living quietly, independently, and far from the Hollywood spotlight she had once illuminated with her energy. That night, she attempted to light her kerosene heater, an old, unreliable device she relied on for warmth. Something went terribly wrong. The heater malfunctioned and exploded, sending a burst of flames across the room. Fire raced along the floor and climbed the furniture, trapping Butterfly before she could reach the door. Neighbors saw smoke pouring from the windows and called for help as they rushed toward the burning home, shouting her name. But the blaze grew too fast, swallowing the house in thick black smoke that clouded the air and choked the narrow hallways. Firefighters arrived within minutes. They forced their way inside and found Butterfly collapsed near the doorway, still alive, but gravely injured, her body burned and her breathing shallow. She was rushed to the hospital with severe burns covering more than 70% of her body. By the next day, despite the efforts of doctors, she passed away. The cause was confirmed as thermal injuries from the flash fire caused by the kerosene heater. Butterfly McQueen's journey had always been one of resilience. Despite the fame she earned from Gone with the Wind, she often spoke openly about the racial stereotypes imposed on black actors during her era, refusing to accept degrading roles even when it meant stepping away from Hollywood entirely. She lived life on her own terms, studying philosophy, working various jobs, and choosing independence over limitations set by the industry. In her later years, neighbors knew her as intelligent, cheerful, and unafraid to speak her mind. She rode bicycles, read voraciously, and believed deeply in curiosity as a way of life. That made her death even more tragic. A woman who survived decades of barriers, typecasting, and prejudice was ultimately taken by an accident in her own home. After the fire was extinguished, what remained was little more than charred wood and ashes, a lifetime of memories reduced to fragments. But tributes poured in from across the country. Film historians remembered her not just as Prissy, but as a pioneer who stood against typecasting long before it was safe or common to do so. Butterfly McQueen's final moments were marked by fire, but the legacy she left behind remains untouchable. Her light, bright, stubborn, and unmistakably her own, was something no flame could ever erase. Number 10. Teresa Graves. Just before midnight on October 10, 2002, flames erupted inside a modest single-story home on West 51st Street in Los Angeles. Neighbors noticed the smoke first, thick, dark, rising fast, and rushed outside shouting for help. Inside that burning home was Teresa Graves, the trailblazing actress and singer whose presence had electrified American television in the 1970s. She had made history as the first black woman to star in her own hour-long drama series, Get Christie Love, winning the hearts of millions with her fierce energy, radiant charm, and the iconic line, "You're under arrest, sugar." But in her later years, she had stepped away from Hollywood, choosing a quieter, more spiritual life. That peaceful chapter ended in one tragic instant. Investigators later determined that a faulty space heater in Teresa's bedroom had ignited the bedding and curtains. The fire spread rapidly, feeding on dry fabrics and wooden beams, until the room became a furnace. When firefighters arrived, the house was already engulfed, flames shooting through the roof, the heat radiating so intensely that crews had to force their way inside with shields. They found Teresa near her bed, unconscious, surrounded by heavy smoke. Paramedics attempted to revive her, but it was too late. She died from smoke inhalation before the flames reached their full strength. She was only 54. News of her death sent ripples through Hollywood. Though she had stepped away from fame decades earlier, her legacy remained powerful. Teresa Graves began her career as a singer and dancer on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, where her humor and brilliance made her a standout. But it was her groundbreaking role in Get Christie Love that changed television. She shattered barriers, becoming a symbol of independence, representation, and strength for a generation of young viewers, especially young black girls who saw, perhaps for the first time, a heroine who looked like them. After leaving the industry, Teresa devoted her life to spiritual study and humanitarian work as a Jehovah's Witness. She cared for her mother, mentored young women, and embraced a quiet existence far removed from Hollywood's glare. Friends described her as gentle, generous, and at peace with her choices. The fire that claimed her home destroyed almost everything inside, leaving behind ashes and warped fragments of a life once filled with applause. Yet the legacy she left remains untouched. Tributes poured in honoring a woman who broke barriers with grace, courage, and unwavering conviction. Teresa Graves left this world in fire, but she lived it with light, an unmistakable glow that continues to shine in the history of television. Number 11. Dennis Patrick. Shortly after midnight on October 13, 2002, the quiet hills of Hollywood were shaken by the sight of thick black smoke rising from a two-story home perched along a winding hillside road. Inside that burning house lived Dennis Patrick, a veteran actor whose deep voice, commanding presence, and decades of steady work had made him one of television's most recognizable faces. He wasn't a household name to everyone, but to those who watched Dark Shadows, Dallas, or The $6 Million Man, his face was unforgettable. One of those rare performers who could steal a scene with a single look. That night, however, there were no cameras, no scripts, no audience, only fire. Neighbors were the first to notice the smoke seeping from the eaves, followed by the glow of flames inside the living room. They called for help, but within minutes, the blaze intensified, feeding on the wooden beams and old wiring of the decades-old structure. When firefighters arrived, the inferno was already consuming the walls, the roof trembling under the pressure of heat. Crews fought their way inside, searching through the dark, choking smoke. They found Dennis collapsed near the staircase, overcome by fumes before he ever had a chance to escape. He was pronounced dead at the scene, the cause confirmed as smoke inhalation. He was 84. The investigation later revealed that the fire likely began with an electrical malfunction in a floor lamp, an unseen spark, a small failure, igniting a chain of events that would erase a lifetime's worth of memories in a matter of minutes. By morning, the house was reduced to rubble. Only a stone fireplace remained standing among the ashes, a stark reminder of the night flames stole a man who had spent his life building a career brick by brick, roll by roll. Dennis Patrick's journey through Hollywood had been long and steady. He acted in hundreds of television episodes from the 1950s through the 1990s, earning respect from colleagues for his discipline and professionalism. He was the kind of actor audiences recognized instantly, even if they couldn't always recall his name. And within the industry, he was admired for his generosity he showed younger performers finding their way. Off-screen, he preferred a quiet life, far from the chaos of Hollywood parties. He lived with humility and grace, a man who didn't chase the spotlight, but contributed to television's golden eras nonetheless. His death reminded Hollywood how fragile life can be, how quickly decades of work, photographs, scripts, and personal treasures can disappear in a single night of smoke and flame. Dennis Patrick may not have been the loudest star, but he was one of the most enduring, an artist whose presence shaped television for half a century. And though fire claimed his final moments, it could never erase the mark he left on the craft he served with such quiet dedication. Number 12. Royce D. Applegate. At sunrise on January 1, 2003, while the world was waking to a new year, a thick column of smoke was already rising over the Hollywood Hills. The source was a two-story home on Green Valley Road, fully engulfed, flames tearing through the roof as neighbors stood helpless in the street. Inside that burning home was Royce D. Applegate, the respected character actor whose warm voice, rugged presence, and steady craftsmanship had made him a familiar figure in films and television for more than 2 decades. Known for roles in Sequest DSV Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And The Rookie, he was the kind of actor audiences trusted instantly, someone who brought depth even to the smallest roles. But on that first morning of 2003, the new year carried no mercy. Neighbors later told investigators they heard popping sounds from inside the house before flames erupted from the upper floor. The fire spread with terrifying speed, feeding on old wooden beams and dry structural materials that burned like tinder. When firefighters arrived, the blaze had already consumed most of the second story. The heat was so intense that windows exploded outward, showering the yard with glass. Neighbors shouted Royce's name, hoping he might appear at a window, but there was only the roar of the fire. Crews battled their way inside, cutting through walls and searching every room. When the flames were finally subdued, Royce's body was found near a second-floor window, an agonizing indication that he had tried to escape but never made it through the smoke. The coroner later confirmed he died from a combination of smoke inhalation and severe burns. He was 63. Investigators determined the cause of the fire was likely accidental, possibly triggered by faulty electrical wiring hidden in the ceiling. One spark in the wrong place at the wrong time, turning an ordinary home into a deadly trap. The destruction was total. Only a blackened chimney and fragments of metal framework remained standing after the blaze. To those who knew him, the loss was devastating. Royce Applegate had served in the U.S. Navy before acting, and his grounded, disciplined energy made him beloved on set. He was a gentle presence, soft-spoken, generous, and deeply kind to younger actors. Off-screen, he preferred the quiet life of the hills, caring for stray animals and spending evenings woodworking. His death came as a shock, not only because he was admired, but because it felt like the extinguishing of a hidden gem in Hollywood's history. A working actor who gave everything to his craft without demanding the spotlight. In the wake of the tragedy, colleagues and fans remembered him through the roles he left behind, characters defined by heart, honesty, and a quiet strength unmistakably his own. Fire claimed his final moments, but nothing could diminish the legacy of a man who spent his life illuminating every scene he entered. Number 13. Mike Todd. In the early hours of March 22, 1958, the silence over the New Mexico desert was shattered by the sound of an aircraft struggling against a violent storm. A twin-engine Lockheed Lodestar carrying famed Hollywood producer Mike Todd, along with 3 others, was fighting its way through freezing winds and blinding snow. Todd, known for his flamboyant personality and for producing the Oscar-winning Around the World in 80 Days, had been en route from Burbank to New York for a promotional event. He was 48 years old, at the height of his creative power, and married to Elizabeth Taylor, who remained behind due to illness, a decision that would later haunt her for the rest of her life. At around 2:30 a.m., radio contact was lost. Moments later, the plane plunged into a remote canyon near Grants, New Mexico, crashing with such force that it erupted into a massive fireball. The explosion illuminated the desert sky, the flames burning so intensely that ranchers miles away reported seeing the glow. When rescue teams reached the site later that morning, the aircraft was unrecognizable, reduced to scorched metal and debris scattered across rugged terrain. The fire had devoured nearly every trace of the passengers. Authorities confirmed that all 4 on board died instantly from the impact and the inferno that followed. The investigation revealed that ice buildup on the wings and severe turbulence caused the pilots to lose control. A chain of natural forces, cold, wind, and altitude, had conspired in a moment that no one could escape. For Hollywood, the loss was staggering. Todd had been one of the industry's boldest visionaries, a showman with dreams as large as the screens he filled. His productions blended spectacle and heart, earning him deep admiration throughout the industry. Elizabeth Taylor, upon receiving the news, collapsed in grief. Reporters captured her devastation, and the world mourned alongside her. a massive memorial was held in his honor, attended by hundreds of stars who had been touched by his philosophy that entertainment should be grand, human, and unforgettable. Even decades later, locals still speak of the fire that lit up the desert sky that night, a blaze so bright it seemed impossible that anything could survive it. And nothing did. Mike Todd's story ended in flames on a desolate stretch of land, but his vision continued to shape Hollywood long after the smoke faded. His legacy burned on through the films he made, the artists he inspired, and the profound mark he left on the golden age of movie making. Number 14. Aaliyah. On the afternoon of August 25, 2001, the runway at Marsh Harbor Airport in the Bahamas shimmered under the summer sun as a small Cessna 402B prepared for takeoff. On board was Aaliyah, an R&B icon, actress, and one of the brightest young talents of her generation. She had just finished filming the music video for Rock the Boat, a project that showcased the effortless grace, confidence, and elegance that millions around the world adored. She was only 22, but she had already changed the sound of an entire era. Moments after the plane lifted off the ground, witnesses saw it struggle. The aircraft wobbled, dipped, then plunged nose first into a nearby marsh, exploding on impact. A fire erupted instantly, engulfing the wreckage in thick black smoke that spiraled upward into the sky. The violent blaze was visible from the airport, and by the time rescue crews reached the scene, flames were still tearing through the broken frame of the plane. All 9 passengers were gone. Aaliyah's body was found near the front, and the coroner later confirmed she died instantly from severe head trauma and burns. The crash investigation uncovered a heartbreaking truth. The plane was overloaded by several hundred pounds, far exceeding its safe weight limit. Even worse, the pilot was not licensed to fly the aircraft and had traces of cocaine and alcohol in his system. The tragedy wasn't just sudden, it was preventable. For her fans, her friends, and the entire entertainment industry, the news felt unreal. Aaliyah had been rising fast, blending angelic vocals with a futuristic sound that reshaped R&B. Her hits, Are You That Somebody, One in a Million, Try Again, had already become defining tracks of the late 90s and early 2000s. And her film career was taking flight. She had starred in Romeo Must Die and was poised for more leading roles, including the Matrix sequels. The world believed she was destined for decades of brilliance. In the days that followed, thousands gathered in New York, Los Angeles, and Detroit for candlelight vigils. Fans wept in the streets. Her funeral was broadcast live. Her casket carried in a glass horse-drawn carriage surrounded by white doves, a heartbreaking symbol of a life both beautiful and brief. The crash site in the Bahamas became a quiet memorial, a patch of scorched earth where melted metal and ashes marked the place where the world lost a star it was not ready to lose. Aaliyah's final moments were swallowed by fire, but the legacy she left behind continues to glow. Soft, timeless, and unforgettable. Her music still echoes. Her influence still shapes artists today. And her name lives on, not in tragedy, but in the brilliance she gave the world in just 22 short years. Number 15. Vic Morrow. On the night of July 23, 1982, a film set on the outskirts of Los Angeles was transformed into one of the most horrifying disaster scenes in Hollywood history. Actor Vic Morrow, known for his rugged intensity and commanding presence in classics like Blackboard Jungle and the TV series Combat, was filming a dramatic wartime sequence for Twilight Zone the movie. The set had been designed to resemble a Vietnamese village. Explosions, pyrotechnics, and helicopters hovering low overhead, all meant to create a gripping scene of chaos. But what happened that night crossed the line between cinematic illusion and deadly reality. As cameras rolled during a late-night take, Vic carried two child actors through a shallow river, running beneath the thunder of a hovering helicopter. Special effects explosions detonated around them. Too close, too powerful, too uncontrolled. One of the blasts sent a surge of fire and debris into the helicopter's tail, causing the pilot to lose control. In an instant, the aircraft pitched downward, its rotor blades slashing through the air as the crew shouted warnings no one had time to react to. The helicopter fell directly onto the actors. The impact was catastrophic. Vic Morrow and the two children were killed instantly, the scene erupting into flames and chaos as stunned crew members rushed toward the wreckage, shouting in disbelief. Firefighters arrived to find burning debris scattered across the set, the helicopter engulfed and cast-in crew members shaken to their core. The coroner later confirmed that Vic Morrow died the moment the rotor struck him, an end so sudden and violent that no one on set could process it. He was 53. The tragedy triggered one of the largest investigations in Hollywood history. Director John Landis and several crew members were charged with involuntary manslaughter, though they were later acquitted. Still, the public outrage was immense. Safety regulations on film sets were overhauled, rewriting how explosions, aircraft, and stunt sequences would be handled for decades to come. For those who knew Vic, the sorrow ran deeper than headlines. He had built a long and respected career through determination, grit, and devotion to his craft. He was a father, a mentor, and a performer who fought for authenticity in every scene he touched. His daughter, Jennifer Jason Leigh, who would go on to become an acclaimed actress herself, rarely spoke of the tragedy, carrying the loss privately. The set where the accident happened was dismantled, the riverbed cleared, the scorched earth eventually reclaimed by time. But the memory of that night, the fire, the screams, the impossible moment when fiction turned into fatal truth remains one of Hollywood's darkest reminders of the price paid when safety fails. Vic Morrow's final moments were consumed by chaos and flame, but his legacy endures in the powerful performances he gave and the changes his death forced the industry to make, changes that protect countless actors today. Fire has shaped countless myths throughout human history, but in Hollywood it has written some of its most heartbreaking truths. Each of these 15 storms carried their own light, some bold, some gentle, some still rising, yet all were taken by flames that appeared without warning, turning ordinary moments into final chapters. Their stories remind us how fragile life is beneath the glitter of fame, how quickly everything can vanish in heat, smoke, and silence. But they also remind us of something greater, that a legacy doesn't end where a life does. It endures in the films they made, the music they left behind, and the memories carried by millions who loved them from afar. If these stories moved you, take a moment to honor them by remembering their names, their work, and the pieces of themselves they gifted to the world. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay aware, and join us again for more untold stories from behind Hollywood's darkest chapters.